They laughed when he called me the family's disappointment. I just smiled. People always confuse silence for weakness. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. My name is David Harrison, and I work in cybersecurity for Morrison Securities, one of the largest investment firms on the East Coast. When people hear cybersecurity, they picture some guy in a basement fixing printers and resetting passwords. What they don't understand is that I'm the one who protects billions of dollars from people who think they're smarter than the system. I see everything that flows through our networks, every transaction, every communication, every digital footprint left by anyone who does business with us or our clients. Tonight was supposed to be a celebration dinner. My sister-in-law Maya had been dating this new guy for 3 months, and according to my wife Claire, he was the one. The reservation was at Ocean View, that overpriced seafood palace downtown, where the waiters wear bow ties. The wine list starts at $60 a bottle, and a simple piece of fish costs more than most people make in a day. I should have known something was off when Claire spent 2 hours getting ready. She usually takes 20 minutes tops, throws on whatever's clean, and calls it good. Tonight, she picked out her black Versace dress, the one she bought for her company's Christmas party last year, with money from our joint savings account. The one that cost $3,000 and made me question whether I married a woman or a credit card statement with legs. "You're wearing that?" she asked, eyeing my navy button-down and khakis like I'd chosen to wear a garbage bag to a royal wedding. "What's wrong with this?" "Nothing, if you're going to interview for a job at Best Buy or meet someone's parents in 1995. I changed into my charcoal gray suit, the Armani knockoff I bought for job interviews and funerals. Claire nodded her approval while applying another layer of her $200 lipstick in the bathroom mirror. I watched her carefully, noting how she angled herself just right, practicing expressions like an actress preparing for the performance of her life. "Who exactly are we trying to impress tonight?" I asked, leaning against the doorframe. "Maya's nervous about introducing him to the family. I want to make sure we make a good impression." "Since when do you care about making good impressions on Maya?" Claire's hand paused halfway to her mouth, lipstick tube suspended in midair. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing. Forget it." But I didn't forget it, and I could tell she knew I wouldn't. Claire and Maya had been competitive since childhood, despite the 5-year age gap. Or maybe because of it. Claire was the successful older sister with the corporate job, the designer wardrobe, and the husband with a steady income. Maya was the dreamy younger one who taught elementary school, drove a 10-year-old Honda Civic, and lived in a 1-bedroom apartment with plants instead of furniture. They loved each other, but love and rivalry aren't mutually exclusive in families. We arrived at Ocean View at 7 sharp. The hostess, a blonde 20-something who looked like she moonlighted as an Instagram influencer, led us through the dining room past tables of people who looked like they discussed their stock portfolios over appetizers and measured their success by the thread count of their table linens. Maya was already there with her parents, Tom and Linda Walsh. They looked uncomfortable in their Sunday best, like tourists who'd accidentally wandered into the wrong part of town and were too polite to leave. Tom was wearing the same navy suit he'd worn to my wedding 5 years ago, the one he probably bought at Men's Warehouse during a clearance sale. Linda had on a floral dress that probably came from J.C. Penney, though she'd tried to dress it up with a pearl necklace that had seen better decades. They were good people, honest people, the kind who saved for 6 months to afford a dinner like this, and then spent the entire meal worried about whether they were holding their forks correctly. "Where is he?" Claire asked, checking her phone for the 3rd time since we'd sat down, her manicured fingers dancing across the screen with the nervous energy of someone expecting important news. "He'll be here," Maya said, glowing with that particular radiance that comes from being newly in love, or newly stupid. Sometimes it's impossible to tell the difference until the credit card bills arrive and reality sets in like a hangover. "What did you say his name was again?" I asked, though I'd heard it perfectly well the first time and had already made mental notes about looking into his background. Antonio Castellano, Maya said, pronouncing each syllable like she was tasting expensive wine, savoring the sound of success. He works in private equity, manages investment portfolios for high-net-worth clients, pension funds, university endowments. Fancy, Tom said, trying to inject enthusiasm into his voice. I could tell he had no idea what private equity meant, but he knew it sounded important and expensive, the kind of job that came with respect and financial security. I kept my expression neutral, but my mind was already working. In my line of work, you learn that people who announce their success before anyone asks about it usually have something to hide. Real money doesn't need to explain itself. Real success speaks quietly and carries a big stick. The bread basket arrived, along with olive oil that probably cost more per ounce than most people's lunch, served in little dishes that looked like they belonged in a museum. Linda took a small piece and nibbled it carefully, like she was afraid it might bite back or cost extra if she ate too much. Tom studied the wine list with the intense concentration of a man trying to find something that wouldn't require a second mortgage on his house. "Should we order wine?" Claire asked, her voice carrying that particular tone she used when she was trying to sound sophisticated, but wasn't quite sure she was pulling it off. "Let's wait for Antonio," Maya said, her eyes bright with anticipation. "He knows about wine. He's been teaching me about different regions, vintages, how to pair wines with food." "Teaching you what exactly?" I asked, genuinely curious about what kind of wine education someone could provide in 3 months of dating. "About different regions, vintages, how to pair wines with food. Did you know that Burgundy wines can only come from the Burgundy region of France? Anything else is just imitation, no matter how good it tastes." "Fascinating," I said, because it was easier than pointing out that anyone with Google and 10 minutes of free time could learn wine facts that would impress someone who'd never thought much about wine before. At 7:20, Antonio finally made his entrance. He was exactly what central casting would order for successful financier in a romantic comedy. 6'2", perfectly styled dark hair with just enough gray at the temples to suggest wisdom and experience, a tan that screamed, "I vacation in places you need a passport to pronounce," and a watch that caught the restaurant's ambient lighting every time he moved his wrist. He wore his confidence like expensive cologne, applied liberally and designed to make an impression from across the room. "Sorry I'm late," he said, leaning down to kiss Maya on both cheeks, like we were having dinner in some European cafe instead of a touristy seafood restaurant in downtown Boston. "Big deal closing tomorrow. You know how it is when millions of dollars are on the line." Nobody at the table knew how it was when millions of dollars were on the line, but we all nodded like we did, like we were familiar with the weight of such enormous financial responsibility. "No problem at all," Claire said, standing up to hug him with an enthusiasm that seemed disproportionate to meeting her sister's boyfriend for the first time. The hug lasted 4 seconds too long. I counted, because counting details is what I do for a living, and the habit extends to all areas of my life. I always count. It's a professional hazard you develop when your job involves tracking digital patterns, analyzing data flows, and spotting anomalies in systems that process billions of dollars every day. Most people don't notice when things don't add up. I notice everything, catalog it, and file it away for future reference. Antonio shook hands with Tom, who looked impressed by the firmness of his grip and the way he maintained eye contact during the handshake. He kissed Linda's hand with old-world charm, which made her blush like a teenager meeting her favorite movie star. Then he turned to me. "You must be David," he said, extending his hand with the practiced confidence of someone who'd perfected his first impression routine. "Maya's told me so much about you. Nothing too embarrassing, I hope. Just that you're the family tech expert. Always good to have someone who understands computers and all that technical stuff." The way he said computers and technical stuff made it sound like I repaired typewriters for a living, like I was some kind of anachronistic craftsman working with obsolete technology. Something like that, I said, noting the subtle condescension in his tone and filing it away with my other observations. Antonio signaled the sommelier with the casual authority of someone accustomed to being served, someone who expected immediate attention from service staff. "Let's start with champagne," he said, without consulting anyone else at the table. "Dom Perignon 2010 if you have it. If not, Cristal will do." The sommelier nodded with the practiced deference of someone who recognized expensive taste when he saw it, and glided away to retrieve what would undoubtedly be the most expensive bottle of champagne in the restaurant. I did some quick mental math. That bottle would cost more than Tom's monthly pension check, more than Maya made in a week of teaching third graders, more than Claire and I typically spent on groceries in a month. "Is this a special occasion?" Linda asked, clearly worried about who was going to pay for champagne that cost more than her car payment. "Every dinner with beautiful women is a special occasion," Antonio said with practiced charm, which made Maya giggle like a schoolgirl and Claire smile in a way that made my stomach turn and my professional instincts kick into high gear. While we waited for the champagne, Antonio regaled us with stories about his work, his travels, his recent acquisition of what he called a modest penthouse in Miami Beach. Every story seemed carefully designed to emphasize one central point. Antonio Castellano was not like the rest of us. He occupied a different stratosphere of success, wealth, and sophistication. "The view is absolutely breathtaking," he said, pulling out his iPhone, the latest model naturally, and scrolling through photos of ocean vistas and city skylines. "You can see South Beach from the living room, Biscayne Bay from the bedroom, and the entire Miami skyline from the kitchen. 360-degree views of paradise." "That's incredible," Linda said, leaning in to get a better look at the photos, her eyes wide with the kind of amazement reserved for glimpsing lifestyles that existed only in movies and magazines. "How many bedrooms?" Claire asked, and I noticed she was paying closer attention to the details than seemed necessary for casual conversation. "3, but I'm thinking of converting one into a wine cellar. I've been collecting vintages from around the world, Bordeaux, Burgundy, some excellent Napa Valley selections. Wine is like art, really. It appreciates over time if you know what you're doing." "How much did a place like that cost?" Tom asked, then immediately looked embarrassed for asking such a direct question, probably wondering if inquiring about money was considered rude in sophisticated circles. Antonio waved his hand dismissively, like money was just an abstract concept that didn't apply to people like him. "When you find something you love, price becomes irrelevant. Life's too short to compromise on your dreams, don't you think?" I caught Claire's eye across the table. She was staring at Antonio like he'd just recited the most profound philosophy she'd ever heard instead of spouting generic rich guy platitudes about not looking at price tags. There was something in her expression I hadn't seen in years, a kind of hunger, a longing for something she thought she was missing. The champagne arrived with appropriate ceremony. The sommelier presented the bottle to Antonio like he was offering a precious artifact for inspection. Antonio nodded his approval without even looking at the label, demonstrating the kind of casual relationship with luxury that people spend their whole lives trying to achieve. "To new friendships?" Antonio said, raising his glass with the practiced gesture of someone who made a lot of toasts. "And to Maya, who's brought such unexpected joy into my life these past few months." We all clinked glasses. The champagne was excellent, though I couldn't tell if it was any better than the $50 bottle I might have chosen. But that wasn't the point. The point was that Antonio could afford to spend $500 on wine without thinking twice about it, without checking his bank account, without calculating how many hours he'd have to work to afford such extravagance. "What about you, David?" Antonio asked. turning his attention to me with the focused intensity of a salesman who'd identified his most challenging prospect. Maya mentioned you work in technology. What kind of technology exactly? Cybersecurity, I said. I work for an investment firm. We handle protection for financial transactions, data security, threat assessment. Oh, like fixing computers when they break down and helping people reset their passwords? The question landed like a gentle insult, delivered with a smile, but designed to diminish my professional significance. More like protecting computers from people who want to break them and steal the money inside them. Antonio's smile flickered slightly, like he'd expected a different response. Must be nice having such a straightforward job. No stress, no pressure, no life or death decisions. Just clock in, clock out, collect your steady paycheck. Maya shifted uncomfortably in her seat, sensing the undercurrent of tension. David's actually very successful at what he does. His company handles billions of dollars in transactions. I'm sure he is, Antonio said, his tone suggesting exactly the opposite. We all contribute in our own way. The world needs people who are good with technical details. The condescension in his voice was subtle but unmistakable. I filed it away with the growing collection of small observations I'd been making since he'd walked through the door. What exactly do you do in private equity? I asked, genuinely curious to hear how he'd explain his alleged profession. Antonio's eyes lit up. This was clearly his favorite topic, his main stage for performing success. I manage investment portfolios for pension funds, university endowments, sovereign wealth funds. We're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars in assets under management. When I make a decision, it affects thousands of people's retirement funds, children's college educations, entire communities' economic futures. That sounds like enormous responsibility, Linda said, clearly impressed by the scale of financial power he was describing. It is. But that's what separates the wheat from the chaff in this business. Anyone can manage a small portfolio, balance a checkbook, make conservative investments. It takes a special kind of person to handle the pressure of managing institutional money, to make split-second decisions when millions of dollars are hanging in the balance. He paused to take a sip of champagne, letting the weight of his alleged importance settle over the table like expensive perfume. Just last month, I closed a deal that will generate $40 million in returns for a teacher's pension fund in Ohio. That's $40 million that will help retired educators maintain their dignity in their golden years, money that will pay for their medications, their housing, their basic needs. $40 million? Tom repeated, his voice filled with awe. To a man who'd worked construction his entire life and saved every penny for retirement, $40 million was an incomprehensible sum. It's all about reading the markets, Antonio continued, settling into his lecture mode. Understanding global trends, political implications, currency fluctuations. You have to think 3 steps ahead of everyone else, anticipate moves before they happen, see opportunities that other people miss. I nodded along, making appropriate sounds of interest. But something wasn't adding up in my mental calculations. Private equity firms managed billions, yes, but individual portfolio managers didn't typically handle deals worth $40 million on their own. That kind of money moved through committees, teams, layers of approval and oversight. Either Antonio was exaggerating his role in the process, or he wasn't being entirely truthful about what he did for a living. Which firm do you work for? I asked, the question coming out more casually than I felt. Castellano Capital Management, he said without hesitation, like he'd been expecting the question and had his answer prepared. It's a boutique firm. We specialize in alternative investments for ultra-high net worth clients and institutional investors. I don't think I've heard of it, I said, though I made it sound like mere curiosity rather than suspicion. And I thought I knew most of the major players in Boston's financial scene. We're relatively new, Antonio said smoothly. I founded the company 2 years ago after working for some of the bigger firms, Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, places like that. But I wanted more autonomy, more ability to build personal relationships with clients instead of being just another face in a corporate machine. That's incredibly impressive, Claire said, her voice carrying an enthusiasm that seemed disproportionate to the conversation. Starting your own firm takes real courage, real vision. It does, Antonio agreed, his attention turning toward her with obvious interest. But sometimes, you have to take risks to achieve greatness. Some people are content to work for other people their whole lives, to play it safe and accept whatever someone else decides they're worth. Other people have the vision to create their own destiny. He looked directly at me when he said it, and I understood the subtext perfectly. Some people take risks and build empires. Other people work for other people and fix their computers when they break. The conversation moved on to other topics, but I noticed that Antonio and Claire seemed to be conducting a parallel dialogue, finding ways to connect their comments, building on each other's observations. Antonio's gym routine, he had a personal trainer who used to work with professional athletes. His travel schedule, business trips to Dubai, London, Tokyo for high-level client meetings. His plans to buy a yacht, something modest, just 40 feet or so, perfect for weekend trips to Martha's Vineyard and Nantucket. Everything was about acquisition, accumulation, display. He wasn't having dinner with Maya's family. He was giving a carefully choreographed performance designed to demonstrate his superiority over everyone else at the table, particularly me. And it was working. Tom and Linda hung on every word, like he was sharing the secrets of success. Maya gazed at him like he'd descended from Mount Olympus, specifically to grace her with his divine presence. And Claire? Claire was practically vibrating with interest, asking follow-up questions, making connections, engaging with an enthusiasm I hadn't seen from her in years. "You must work incredibly long hours," she said during a lull in the conversation, leaning forward slightly as she spoke. "Success requires sacrifice," Antonio replied, his tone taking on the gravity of someone sharing profound wisdom. "But I love what I do. When you're passionate about something, truly passionate, it doesn't feel like work. It feels like purpose." "I know exactly what you mean," Claire said, her voice carrying an intimacy that made me uncomfortable. "I'm in public relations, and the hours can be absolutely brutal, but there's nothing like the rush of closing a big campaign, of seeing your strategy work in real time." "What kind of campaigns do you handle?" Antonio asked, leaning forward with apparent fascination, giving her his complete attention in a way that felt practiced but effective. For the next 15 minutes, they discussed the challenges of corporate public relations, the importance of brand management in a social media world, the delicate art of crisis communication. I might as well have been invisible. Tom and Linda tried to follow along, but they were clearly out of their depth, nodding politely while the conversation moved through territory they didn't understand. Maya looked slightly annoyed that her boyfriend's attention had shifted so completely to her sister. I ate my salmon and listened, cataloging every exchange, every look, every subtle signal. The way Antonio asked follow-up questions that showed he was actually paying attention. The way Claire's laugh got a little too loud, a little too frequent. The way they seemed to forget there were other people at the table, other relationships that deserved consideration. "You're quiet tonight," Claire said to me during a brief pause, and I realized she was right. I'd contributed almost nothing to the conversation for the past half hour. "Just listening," I said, which was true. I was listening very carefully. "David's always been the strong, silent type," she said to the table, but there was something in her tone that I didn't like. A hint of apology, as if my presence needed explanation, as if she was embarrassed by my lack of contribution to their scintillating conversation about market trends and brand positioning. The comment stung because it carried an undertone of dismissal, like she was apologizing for bringing someone so boring to such an interesting dinner party. Dessert arrived with the evening's biggest revelations, though I was the only one who recognized them as such at the time. Antonio ordered the restaurant's signature chocolate soufflé, a theatrical creation that came to the table literally on fire and cost more than most families spent on groceries in a week. He made a show of not looking at the price, just pointed at the menu description and told the waiter to make it happen. "My trainer is going to absolutely kill me," he said, patting his flat stomach with mock concern. "But life's too short not to indulge occasionally. You have to reward yourself when you've earned it." "I completely agree," Claire said, laughing as if he'd just delivered the wittiest observation in human history. "You only live once, right? Why deny yourself pleasure when you have the means to enjoy it?" "Exactly. That's my philosophy exactly," Antonio said, his eyes lighting up with the enthusiasm of someone who'd found a kindred spirit. "That's why I refuse to settle for ordinary experiences. Why eat at chain restaurants when you can discover places like this? Why drive a Honda when you can experience the engineering perfection of a Porsche? Why live in the suburbs when you can wake up to an ocean view every morning?" I watched Claire absorb every word like gospel, like she was hearing her own thoughts articulated for the first time. She'd been complaining lately about our house, our neighborhood, our life in general. Nothing was ever quite enough anymore. The kitchen was too small for entertaining. The backyard was too ordinary, too suburban. Our friends were too boring, too content with their mundane lives. She'd been talking about making changes, exploring options, not settling for less than we deserve. Now I was beginning to understand where these ideas were coming from, or at least where they were being reinforced. "What kind of car do you drive?" Tom asked, clearly hoping for another glimpse into Antonio's world of casual luxury and sophisticated choices. "Porsche 911 Turbo," Antonio said with the casual tone of someone discussing the weather. "Midnight blue with custom carbon fiber details and a premium Bose sound system. It's not about showing off, though I admit it turns heads. It's about appreciating quality engineering, precision craftsmanship." "How fast does it go?" Maya asked, her eyes bright with curiosity and admiration. "Fast enough to make any drive interesting?" Antonio said with a grin that suggested he knew exactly how fast it could go and had tested its limits. "Though I never really open it up on public roads. The real pleasure is in the handling, the precision steering, the way it responds to every touch. It's like driving a piece of art." "I'd love to see it sometime," Claire said, and something cold settled in my stomach. Not jealousy exactly, but recognition. I'd heard that tone before, the same tone she used when she talked about houses she wanted to buy, vacations she wanted to take, lives she wanted to live that were always just beyond our current reach. "Anytime," Antonio said, his response coming a little too quickly, his attention focusing on Claire in a way that seemed to exclude the rest of the table. "Maybe I could take you for a drive sometime. You'd love the acceleration, the way it handles corners." The way he said "you" was clearly directed at Claire, not Maya. Maya either didn't notice the exclusion or chose to ignore it. Claire smiled like he'd just offered to take her on a private tour of Paris. "That would be amazing," she said, her voice carrying an excitement that seemed disproportionate to the offer. I cleared my throat pointedly. "Honey, maybe we should focus on Maya and Antonio tonight. This is their celebration dinner." "Of course," Claire said quickly, though I could see the disappointment flash across her face. I didn't mean to monopolize the conversation. "No monopolization at all," Antonio said smoothly. "I enjoy talking to people who understand ambition, who appreciate the finer things in life." Another subtle dig, another implication that some people at the table understood success and sophistication while others were content with mediocrity and suburban simplicity. "David's very ambitious," Maya said, trying to defend me against what she'd clearly recognized as condescension. "He's worked his way up to a senior position at his firm. He's responsible for protecting millions of dollars." "I'm sure he has," Antonio said, his tone suggesting exactly the opposite. "Though I imagine the technology field is quite different from finance, less dynamic perhaps, more predictable, more about following established protocols than making creative decisions. How so? I asked, genuinely curious to hear him explain his understanding of cybersecurity. Well, computers follow programs, right? They do what they're programmed to do. Markets are living things. They respond to emotion, psychology, global events, human nature. Every day brings new challenges, new opportunities to prove yourself, to demonstrate your value. That's true, I said carefully, though sometimes the most dangerous threats come from things that appear predictable on the surface. The biggest security breaches usually happen when people think they understand a system better than they actually do. Antonio's confident smile flickered slightly. What do you mean by that? Just that overconfidence can be expensive. People who assume they're smarter than the system often discover they're not as smart as they thought they were. Interesting perspective, he said, though his tone suggested he found it anything but interesting. David sees patterns that other people miss, Maya said loyally. It's like having a superpower. He can spot problems before they happen. Everyone has their talents, Antonio said dismissively, waving off my alleged skills like they were party tricks. Speaking of which, I should probably check in with my office. Big day tomorrow, lots of moving pieces to coordinate. He pulled out his phone and glanced at the screen, his expression shifting slightly as he read whatever message had appeared. Actually, I need to step outside for a few minutes. International client calling from London. Time zones. You know how it is when you're dealing with global markets. He excused himself from the table, leaving his linen napkin draped carefully over his chair and his wine glass still half full. The moment he was gone, the energy at the table shifted dramatically. Tom and Linda seemed to relax slightly, like they'd been holding their breath for the past hour. He's absolutely wonderful, Maya said, her eyes following Antonio as he walked toward the restaurant's entrance, phone already pressed to his ear. He certainly seems successful, Linda said diplomatically, the kind of response that managed to be positive without committing to any specific judgment. He's very confident, Tom added, which could have been either a compliment or an observation. He should be confident, Maya said, rising to defend her boyfriend against what she perceived as faint praise. He's accomplished so much at such a young age. Did you know he speaks 4 languages fluently? And he's traveled to over 30 countries for business? I watched Claire's face while Maya listed Antonio's alleged achievements. She was hanging on every word, cataloging every detail like she was taking inventory of everything her own life was missing, everything she thought she deserved but didn't have. How did you two meet? Claire asked, and I noticed she was leaning forward with genuine interest. Online, Maya said, her cheeks flushing slightly. Elite Singles. It's a dating app for professionals, people with advanced degrees and high-income careers. His profile was incredible. All these pictures from exotic locations, stories about his work, his travels. I almost didn't message him because I thought he was completely out of my league. You're not out of anyone's league, Linda said firmly, the way mothers do when they're defending their children against self-doubt. I know, Mom. But he's so sophisticated, so worldly. I mean, look at this place. He chose it without even thinking twice about the prices, like money is no object. Through the window I could see Antonio pacing outside, phone pressed to his ear, gesturing animatedly with his free hand. His body language was different now, less controlled, more agitated. Whatever conversation he was having, it wasn't going well. Did he tell you which dating site specifically? I asked, trying to sound casual. Elite Singles, Maya repeated. It's supposed to screen for education and income levels, make sure you're matched with people who are actually successful, not just pretending to be. I made a mental note to look into that later. Not because I was suspicious, well, maybe a little because I was suspicious, but because it never hurt to be thorough when someone seemed too good to be true. Antonio returned to the table 5 minutes later, slipping back into his seat with an apologetic smile that seemed slightly less polished than his earlier expressions. Sorry about that. Minor crisis at the office. Sometimes I think my clients would panic if I disappeared for 5 minutes. Everything okay? Maya asked, concern evident in her voice. Nothing I can't handle, Antonio said, reaching for his wine glass. Just a nervous pension fund manager who's worried about market volatility. I had to talk him down from making some potentially disastrous decisions. Must be incredibly stressful having so much responsibility, Claire said, and I noticed she was looking at him with something approaching admiration. It comes with the territory, Antonio said, settling back into his confident persona. When you're managing hundreds of millions in assets, everyone wants reassurance that their money is safe. It's a heavy burden, but someone has to carry it. He reached across the table to take Maya's hand, his fingers intertwining with hers in a gesture that seemed both intimate and performative. But enough about work. Tonight is about us, about family, about celebrating what really matters in life. Maya beamed at the romantic sentiment. Tom and Linda smiled approvingly. Claire looked wistful, like she was watching something she wanted but couldn't have. I watched Antonio's eyes as he spoke. They were calculating, measuring each person's reaction, adjusting his performance accordingly. He was good at reading people. I'd give him that. He knew exactly what each person at the table wanted to hear, what would make them like him, trust him, admire him. But I was good at reading people too. And what I was reading didn't match what I was hearing. The evening was winding down when Antonio made his first real mistake. He'd been drinking steadily throughout dinner, champagne, wine with each course, cognac with dessert, and alcohol has a way of loosening even the most carefully maintained masks. He was in the middle of another story about his professional success, this one involving a $50 million deal he'd allegedly closed for a university endowment fund, when his phone buzzed against the white tablecloth. He glanced at the screen and his expression changed, not the polished public smile he'd been wearing all evening, but something more intimate, more genuine, more unguarded. "Excuse me for just a second," he said, his fingers moving quickly across the phone's surface. "Just confirming tomorrow night's celebration dinner with the client." Maya looked confused, her brow furrowing slightly. "What celebration dinner?" "Oh, just a business thing," Antonio said, still typing, his attention divided between the phone and the conversation. "Closing celebration with the pension fund clients? Standard practice in our industry. They like to celebrate big wins." "Which clients exactly?" I asked, my professional instincts starting to tingle. "The pension fund I was telling you about earlier. The $40 million deal. They like to celebrate successful transactions with dinner at high-end restaurants." But I was watching his face as he typed, and I could see the reflection of the screen in his eyes. He wasn't typing a business message about pension funds or celebration dinners. He was typing to someone saved in his contacts with a single letter and a heart emoji. C. "Actually," Claire said suddenly, her voice cutting through the conversation like a knife, "I might be working late tomorrow night as well. Don't wait up for me, honey." The timing was too perfect, too convenient, too coordinated. I looked from Antonio to Claire and back again, and I saw something pass between them. Quick, guilty, electric. The kind of look that communicates volumes without saying a word. "Working late again?" I asked Claire, my voice carefully neutral. "That's the 3rd time this month." "Big campaign launching next week," she said, not meeting my eyes, her gaze fixed somewhere over my shoulder. "You know how these things go. Lots of last-minute details to coordinate." But I did know how these things went in Claire's industry. Her job was demanding but predictable. She occasionally worked late, but it was usually planned weeks in advance, not announced spontaneously over dinner. And she'd never been shy about complaining when work interfered with her personal plans. "Where do you usually have these celebration dinners?" I asked Antonio, keeping my tone conversational. "Different places," he said, sliding his phone back into his jacket pocket with studied casualness. Depends on the client's preferences and the significance of the deal. That's interesting, I said, pulling out my own phone and opening the browser. Claire mentioned she's been trying lots of new restaurants lately for her work dinners. Maybe you two have discovered some of the same places. The silence at the table was suffocating. Maya looked back and forth between her sister and her boyfriend with growing confusion. Tom studied his coffee cup like it contained the secrets of the universe. Linda folded and refolded her napkin with mechanical precision. I doubt it, Claire said quickly, her voice pitched slightly higher than normal. I usually stick to casual places, chain restaurants, nothing fancy or expensive. That's interesting, I said, my fingers moving across my phone screen with practiced efficiency. Because last Thursday, when you worked late, I found a receipt in your purse from Le Bernardin. That's a pretty upscale place for a casual work dinner. Claire's face went white, all the color draining from her cheeks like someone had pulled a plug. I can explain that. I'm sure you can, I said, not looking up from my phone. I'm sure you both can. Antonio's confident facade was starting to crack around the edges, small fissures appearing in his polished presentation. I think there might be some kind of misunderstanding here. Maybe, I said, still typing. Let me see if I can clear things up. I opened a new browser window and typed Castellano Capital Management into the search bar. The results came back instantly, and they were exactly what I'd expected to find. Nothing. No website, no SEC filings, no business registration, no news articles, no press releases, no professional directory listings, no nothing. The company simply didn't exist in any searchable database. Funny thing about the internet in our modern age, I said, showing the screen to everyone at the table. When a company manages hundreds of millions of dollars in pension fund investments, they tend to leave a pretty substantial digital footprint. Maya stared at the empty search results, then at Antonio, confusion and concern battling for control of her expression. What does this mean? There's obviously some mistake, Antonio said, but his voice had lost its earlier confidence, taking on a defensive quality I hadn't heard before. Maybe it's listed under a different business name or corporate structure. What different name? I asked, genuinely curious about what explanation he might offer. He didn't have an immediate answer, which was answer enough. I typed in a few more searches. Antonio Castellano, Private Equity, Boston. Antonio Castellano, Finance. Castellano, Investment Management. Nothing relevant came up. No LinkedIn profile, no company directory listings, no professional association memberships, no conference speaking engagements. But then I tried a different approach. I searched for Anthony Castellanos, the more common spelling of the surname. And that's when things got very interesting very quickly. The first result was a news article from the Boston Globe, dated 18 months ago. Local man sentenced in securities fraud case. The second result was a mugshot from the Massachusetts Department of Corrections website, complete with booking number and conviction details. I clicked on the mugshot link and held my breath. It was him. Same face, same eyes, same practiced smile, same bone structure. But this wasn't Antonio Castellano, successful private equity manager and sophisticated man of the world. This was Anthony Castellanos, convicted felon and securities fraud specialist. Well, I said, turning my phone so everyone at the table could see the screen clearly. I think I've figured out where I've heard your name before. The mugshot seemed to suck all the oxygen out of the restaurant. Maya stared at the screen like she was looking at footage from an alien autopsy. Tom's mouth fell open and stayed that way. Linda's hand flew to her chest in a gesture of shock and dismay. Anthony Castellanos, I read aloud from the article, my voice carrying clearly across our corner of the dining room. Sentenced to 18 months in federal prison for securities fraud and identity theft. Released 8 months ago to a halfway house in Newark, New Jersey. Anthony, stood up so abruptly that his chair nearly toppled backward, the sudden movement causing other diners to look in our direction. I don't have to listen to this. Actually, you do, I said, standing up as well and blocking his path to the exit. Because I'm not finished reading. I turned to Maya, who looked like she was going to be physically sick. I'm sorry you have to hear this, but you deserve to know the truth about who you've been dating. What truth? She whispered, her voice barely audible. I scrolled down to read more details from the article. Anthony Castellanos operated a fraudulent investment scheme for nearly 3 years, convincing victims to give him money for fake business ventures and non-existent investment opportunities. He used stolen identities and forged documents to support his claims of being a successful financial advisor and private equity manager. That was all a misunderstanding, Anthony said desperately, his smooth confidence completely evaporating. The charges were exaggerated by prosecutors trying to make their careers. I made some mistakes, yes, but I've learned from them. Have you? I asked. Because it seems like you're running exactly the same kind of scam right now. I looked around the table, making eye contact with each family member. There is no Castellano Capital Management. There's no penthouse in Miami Beach. There's probably no Porsche either. Everything he's told you tonight has been an elaborate lie. Maya's eyes filled with tears, her hands trembling as the reality of the situation began to sink in. Is this true? Anthony reached for her hand across the table, but she pulled away like his touch might burn her. Maya, please. Let me explain what really happened. Explain what? That you're a criminal? That everything about you is fake? I'm not a criminal anymore. I've paid my debt to society. I've served my time. I'm trying to start over, to build a new life, to become a better person. By lying about everything? By creating a completely false identity? I was going to tell you the truth eventually, once you got to know the real me. I just wanted you to see past the mistakes I'd made. The real you? Maya laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. It was bitter, hurt, disillusioned. I don't even know what that means anymore. How am I supposed to know what's real about you? I sat back down, letting the family drama unfold around me. But I wasn't done yet. I had one more card to play, and it was the most important one in the deck. Claire, I said quietly, my voice cutting through the emotional chaos at the table. How long have you been seeing him? The question landed like a bomb in the middle of an already explosive situation. Everyone turned to stare at her. She opened her mouth, closed it, then opened it again, like a fish gasping for air on dry land. I don't know what you mean, she said finally, but her voice was shaking. Yes, you do. I pulled up the text messages I'd found on her phone the previous week when she'd left it charging in our kitchen. I'd told myself I was just checking the time, but that wasn't entirely honest. Something had felt off for months, and I'd finally decided to investigate my suspicions. These are from your phone, I said, reading aloud from the screen. Tuesday night, can't wait to see you tomorrow. Wednesday morning, last night was incredible. Thursday afternoon, same hotel as usual? Claire's face crumpled like a demolished building. David, please. Not here. Not like this. No, let's do this here, I said, my voice getting harder. Let's do this in front of everyone so there's no confusion about what's been happening behind everyone's back. I turned to Maya, whose expression had moved beyond hurt into something approaching rage. Your boyfriend has been sleeping with your sister for the past 2 months. Maya stared at Claire with an expression of complete and utter betrayal. Is that true? Claire started crying, but she didn't deny it. She couldn't deny it. How could you do this to me? Maya asked, her voice rising above a whisper for the first time. I trusted you. I brought him to meet our family because I thought I was falling in love with him. I never meant for it to happen, Claire sobbed. It just did. These things just happen sometimes. Things don't just happen, I said coldly. People make choices. People decide to betray the people who trust them most. Other diners were starting to stare openly now. The maitre d' was walking toward our table with a concerned expression, clearly preparing to intervene. The evening was falling apart in spectacular fashion, but I wasn't finished yet. "Anthony," I said, turning back to the man who'd been lying to my family for months. "How many other women are you running this same scam on right now?" "It's not a scam," he protested, but his voice lacked conviction. "My feelings for Maya are genuine. Everything I feel for her is real." "Your feelings for Maya?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You've been cheating on her with her own sister since almost the moment you met her." "That was a mistake. Claire came on to me. I was weak, vulnerable. I made an error in judgment." "Hey!" Claire snapped, her sadness transforming instantly into anger. "Don't you dare try to blame this on me." "You seduced me," Anthony shot back, abandoning any pretense of sophistication. "You kept texting me, inviting me out for coffee, telling me how unhappy you were in your marriage. Because you told me you were unhappy with Maya. You said she was too naive, too childish, that you needed someone more sophisticated. I never said that. You said she was boring. You said you were only dating her because you were lonely after getting out of prison." Maya stood up slowly, her chair scraping against the floor with a sound like fingernails on a chalkboard. When she spoke, her voice was deadly quiet, more frightening than shouting. "Get away from me," she said. "Both of you. Get away from me right now before I do something I'll regret." "Maya, please," Anthony started, reaching toward her. "No," she said, stepping back from the table. "I don't want to hear another word from either of you. I don't want to see either of you again." She grabbed her purse and walked out of the restaurant without looking back, her dignity intact despite everything that had been taken from her. Tom and Linda scrambled to follow her, shooting looks of disappointment and disgust at Claire as they passed our table. That left me sitting with my cheating wife and her convicted felon boyfriend, surrounded by the wreckage of what was supposed to be a family celebration dinner. "I hope it was worth it," I said to Claire. "David, please, we need to talk about this privately. We can work through this." We just did talk about it, and we're done working through anything. I stood up and pulled out my wallet, leaving enough cash to cover the check and a generous tip. The waitstaff didn't deserve to suffer because my wife had terrible judgment in men and even worse, judgment in life choices. "Where are you going?" Claire asked, panic creeping into her voice. "Home," I said. "Our home, to pack your things." "You can't just throw me out like this. Watch me." I looked at Anthony one last time. "You might want to find a new place to stay tonight. I have a feeling Maya's going to be making some phone calls to the police, and they're going to be very interested in your current activities." His face went pale. "She won't do that. She's too nice." "Maybe," I said, "but I'm not." I left them sitting at the table and walked out into the cool night air, finally able to breathe again after hours of suffocating pretense and lies. The drive home felt endless. I kept replaying the dinner, realizing I'd ignored every warning sign about Claire, late nights, secretive calls, new clothes. At home, I opened her laptop. Within minutes, I found everything. Her affair with Maya's boyfriend, Anthony, a convicted con artist. She'd researched his criminal record weeks before they started sleeping together. She knew exactly who he was, and did it anyway. Their messages were disgusting. Jokes about me, lies about Maya, expensive hotel receipts paid with stolen credit cards. When Maya called, crying, I told her everything. She'd already reported him to the police. Around 1 a.m., Claire came home, mascara running. "It's not what you think," she said. I turned the screen toward her. "Then what is it?" She tried to justify it, said she felt trapped, unseen, wanted excitement. I told her she'd traded loyalty for cheap thrills. She begged for counseling. I'd already emailed a divorce lawyer. When she realized I meant it, her voice cracked. "Where am I supposed to go?" "Not my problem," I said. "You should have thought about that before you slept with your sister's boyfriend." At the door, she whispered, "I did love you." "I believe you," I said. Just not enough. She left. I locked the door. For the first time in months, the house was silent. And mine again. 6 months later, I was having dinner at a small Italian place in the North End when I saw her. Claire was sitting at a corner table with a man I didn't recognize. Younger than me by at least 5 years, flashier clothes, expensive haircut, the kind of guy who probably described himself as an entrepreneur or business consultant on dating apps. She looked different than I remembered. Thinner, more made up, like she was trying too hard to recapture something that had slipped permanently beyond her reach. The man across from her was doing most of the talking, gesturing animatedly with his wine glass, while she nodded and smiled at what seemed like carefully calculated intervals. I was having dinner with Rachel, the forensic accountant I'd started dating 4 months earlier. We'd met during a case where our companies were collaborating on a financial investigation involving cryptocurrency fraud. She was smart, direct, refreshingly honest about what she wanted from life. No games, no hidden agendas, no dramatic emotional outbursts. "Do you know her?" Rachel asked, noticing that my attention had drifted across the restaurant. "My ex-wife," I said, taking another bite of my osso buco. "The one who had the affair with her sister's boyfriend?" "That's the one." Rachel studied Claire for a moment with the analytical eye of someone trained to spot deception and financial irregularities. "She looks nervous, like she's performing instead of relaxing." She was absolutely right. Claire kept checking her phone, glancing toward the restaurant entrance, playing with her jewelry, adjusting her hair. The man across from her seemed completely oblivious to her discomfort, too caught up in whatever story he was telling to notice that his audience wasn't entirely engaged. "Should we go somewhere else?" Rachel asked considerately. "No need. She hasn't noticed us, and even if she does, it doesn't matter." But as I said it, Claire's eyes swept across the restaurant during one of her nervous surveys and landed directly on our table. For several long seconds, we just looked at each other across the crowded dining room. Then she raised her hand in a small, tentative wave. I nodded politely, but didn't get up to say hello or make any gesture toward conversation. "Are you okay?" Rachel asked, watching my face carefully. "Yeah, I'm completely fine." And I was fine. The anger had faded months ago, replaced by something closer to pity mixed with indifference. Claire was obviously still chasing excitement, still looking for someone to make her feel special and important, still trying to fill whatever emotional void had driven her into Anthony's arms in the first place. The divorce had been finalized 6 weeks earlier. Because I'd been able to prove adultery with comprehensive documentation, the court had ruled in my favor on most of the major disputed issues. Claire received half the equity in our house, but I got to keep the house itself along with all the furniture and belongings. She got half of our joint savings account, but none of my retirement investments or stock options. She got her car and her personal possessions, but no ongoing financial support. Most importantly, she got to keep all the consequences of her choices. Maya had recovered better than anyone had expected, including herself. She'd taken a month-long leave of absence from teaching to travel through Europe by herself, something she'd always dreamed of doing but never had the financial resources to attempt. When she returned, she seemed lighter somehow, more confident, like she'd rediscovered who she was before Anthony had entered her life and distorted her self-perception. She'd started dating again, but carefully and selectively this time. No more elaborate online profiles showcasing impossible lifestyles and fantastic success stories. She was looking for something genuine now, something sustainable and honest. Anthony had disappeared entirely after that disastrous dinner. The police investigation had uncovered evidence that he'd been running similar romance scams on at least 7 other women in the greater Boston area simultaneously. He'd violated his parole conditions by using false identities and had fled Massachusetts before law enforcement could arrest him. There was an active warrant for his arrest, but con artists like Anthony were exceptionally skilled at staying invisible when they needed to vanish. "Ready to order dessert?" Rachel asked when we'd finished our main courses. Actually, let's take our time. I'm really enjoying the conversation and the company. She smiled. What conversation? We've been sitting here in comfortable silence for the past 10 minutes. Exactly. It's incredibly refreshing being with someone who doesn't require constant entertainment or validation. Careful with compliments like that, she said with mock seriousness. Keep talking like that, and I might start thinking you're getting serious about this relationship. Maybe I am getting serious about it. Good, she said simply, because I am too. We ordered dessert and coffee, taking our time, enjoying each other's company without any drama or deception or hidden emotional agendas. Across the restaurant, Claire was still performing for her date, still pretending to be fascinated by whatever he was trying to sell her. When we finally left the restaurant an hour later, I caught one last glimpse of her through the front window. She was checking her phone again, probably calculating how much longer she had to endure the evening before she could politely escape without seeming rude or uninterested. I felt a brief moment of genuine sadness for her, not because I missed her or wanted her back in my life, but because she seemed so fundamentally lost, so desperate to be someone other than who she actually was. You're unusually quiet, Rachel observed as we walked to my car through the cool evening air. Just thinking about choices and consequences. About your ex-wife? About how the things we think will make us happy usually end up making us miserable instead. And what actually does make you happy? I thought about the question seriously as I opened her car door. This, I said finally. Right now. Being with someone who doesn't need me to be anyone other than exactly who I am. Rachel smiled and kissed me gently on the cheek. That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say. As we drove home through the quiet streets of Boston, I realized that I hadn't thought about Claire or Anthony or that catastrophic dinner in weeks. The marriage was definitively over, the betrayal was ancient history, and I was building something completely new with someone who valued honesty and authenticity over excitement and drama. It wasn't the ending I'd originally planned for my life, but it was exactly the ending I deserved, and for the first time in years, that was more than enough.